Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. My name is Adrian Ford, and we are here for another short story discussion. Short story discussion that comes to us today from Amy Tan. The short story in question is Two Kinds. So I've got a So What Happened wrap-up of the story, and then I've got 4 talking points about the story that I think are interesting and worth discussing. So let's start here. What happened? Well, we enter the story with these 3 paragraphs. My mother believed that you could be anything you wanted to be in America. You could open a restaurant. You could work for the government and get good retirement. You could buy a house with almost no money down. You could become rich. You could become instantly famous. Of course, you can be a prodigy too, my mother told me. I was 9. You can be anything. What does Auntie Lindo know? Her daughter, she is only best tricky. America was where all my mother's hopes lay. She had come here in 1949 after losing everything in China. Her mother and father, her family, home. Her first husband and 2 daughters, twin baby girls. But she never looked back with regret. There were so many ways for things to get better. The next page, we get these paragraphs. In fact, so we have the mother figure telling Jing Mei, our main character, that you can be anything. You can even be a prodigy. In fact, in the beginning, I was just as excited as my mother, maybe even more so. I pictured this prodigy part of me as many different images, trying each one on for size. I was a dainty ballerina girl standing by the curtains, waiting to hear the right music that would send me floating on my tiptoes. I was like the Christ child lifted out of the straw manger, crying with holy indignity. I was Cinderella stepping from her pumpkin carriage with sparkly cartoon music filling the air. In all of my imaginings, I was filled with a sense that I would soon become perfect. My mother and father would adore me. I would be beyond reproach. I would never feel the need to sulk for anything. But sometimes the prodigy in me became impatient. If you don't hurry up and get me out of here, I'm disappearing for good, it warned. And then you will always be nothing. So the mother and daughter explore a myriad of perspective gifts. And after seeing my mother's disappointed face once again, so they test things, fail, test things, fail, test things, fail. And after seeing my mother's disappointed face once again, something inside of me began to die. I hated the tests, the raised hopes and failed expectations. Before going to bed at night, I looked in the mirror above the bathroom sink, and when I saw only my face staring back, and that it would always be this ordinary face, I began to cry. Such a sad, ugly girl. I made high-pitched noises like a crazed animal, trying to scratch out the face in the mirror. And then I saw what seemed to be the prodigy side of me. Because I had never seen that face before, I looked at my reflection, blinking so I could see more clearly. The girl staring back at me was angry, powerful. This girl and I were the same. I had new thoughts, willful thoughts, or rather, thoughts filled with lots of won'ts. I won't let her change me, I promised myself. I won't be what I'm not. So now, on nights when my mother presented her tests, I performed listlessly, my head propped up on one arm. I pretended to be bored, and I was, pardon me. I got so bored, I started counting the bellows of the foghorns out on the bay while my mother drilled me in other areas. The sound was comforting and reminded me of the cow jumping over the moon. And the next day, I played the same game with myself, seeing if my mother would give up on me before 8 bellows. After a while, I usually counted only one, maybe two bellows at most. At last, she was beginning to give up hope. At last, she was beginning to give up hope. Hope on her daughter being a prodigy. Her daughter hoping she gives up her hope that she is the prodigy. Just think about that. And she was giving up this hope until her mother saw a little Chinese girl on the Ed Sullivan Show with a Peter Pan haircut like she had, playing the piano on the Ed Sullivan Show. I messed that up. Moving along. 3 days, so there's the Ed Sullivan Show, and her mother gets it in her head, Jing Mei is going to play the piano. 3 days after watching the Ed Sullivan Show, my mother told me what my schedule would be for piano lessons and piano practice. She had talked to Mr. Chong, who lived on the first floor of our apartment building. Mr. Chong was a retired piano teacher, and my mother had traded house cleaning services for weekly lessons and a piano for me to practice on every day, 2 hours a day, from 4 until 6. This creates animosity between mother and daughter, to which the daughter says, "Why don't you like me the way I am? I'm not a genius. I can't play the piano. And even if I could, I wouldn't go on TV if you paid me $1 million, I cried. My mother slapped me. "Who asked you be a genius?" she shouted. "Only ask you be your best. For you's sake. You think I want you be genius? What for? Who asked you?" And it turns out Mr. Chong, her piano teacher, is deaf. And not only is his hearing fading, his vision is slow. He's got a lot of deficiencies, Mr. Chong. Good-spirited, well-intentioned, very flawed. So our speaker, Jing Mei, finds the laziest way she can to do all of the work, but not really do it, taking advantage of Mr. Chong's deficiencies. So maybe I never really gave myself a fair chance. I did pick up the basics pretty quickly, and I might have become a good pianist at that young age. But I was so determined not to try, not to be anybody different than I learned to play only the most ear-splitting preludes, the most discordant hymns. So we have our speaker actively rebelling against her mother's lessons. But her mother, in the most doting mother way possible, gets into conversations with her friends about her friends' daughters, and comparing and contrasting. And eventually, she signs Jing Mei up for a talent show where she will play a piece called Pleading Child. Eventually, the big day is here, and this is how it goes. And I started to play. It was so beautiful. I was so caught up in how lovely I looked that at first I didn't worry about how I would sound. So it was a surprise to me when I hit the first wrong note, and I realized something didn't quite sound right. And then I hit another, and another followed that. A chill started at the top of my head to trickle down, and began to trickle down, yet I couldn't stop playing, as though my hands were bewitched. I kept thinking my fingers would adjust themselves back like a train switching onto the right track. I played this strange jumble through 2 repeats, the sour notes staying with me all the way to the end. When I stood up, I discovered my legs were shaking. Maybe I had just been nervous, and the audience, like old Chong, had seen me go through the right motions and had not heard anything wrong at all. I swept my right foot out, went down on one knee, looked up, and smiled. The room was quiet, except for old Chong, who was beaming and shouting, "Bravo, bravo, well done." But then I saw my mother's face, her stricken face. The audience clapped weakly, and as I walked back to my chair, with my whole face quivering as I tried not to cry, I heard a little boy whisper loudly to his mother, "That was awful." And the mother whispered back, "Well, she certainly tried." So real quick, we're still in the "so it happened" portion, but this description, a chill started at the top of my head and began to trickle down. We've all felt that. That is so expertly written that I can't begin to praise the author enough. The show ends with all of the other children, however, performing admirably. And then we get this from our speaker. Our speaker returns to her seat, and her parents stay through the rest of the show. She thought maybe out of despair they would slink out during the intermission. But my mother's expression was what devastated me. A quiet, blank look that said she had lost everything. I felt the same way, and it seemed as if everybody were now coming up, like gawkers at the scene of an accident, to see what parts were actually missing. When we got on the bus to go home, my father was humming the Busy Bee tune, and my mother was silent. I kept thinking she wanted to wait until we got home before shouting at me. But when my father unlocked the door to our apartment, my mother walked in, and then went back, and then went to the back, into the bedroom. No accusations, no blame. And in a way I felt disappointed. I had been waiting for her to start shouting, so I could shout back and cry and blame her for all of my misery. But regardless of her failings, Mother insists that she practice piano on Monday, and Jing Mei disagrees. They have a fight thereafter, to which the mother says, "Only two kinds of daughters," she shouted in Chinese, "those who are obedient and those who follow their own mind. Only one kind of daughter can live in this house, obedient daughter." And I could sense her anger rising to its breaking point. I wanted to see it spill over. And that's when I remembered the babies she had lost in China, the ones we never talked about. Then I wished I'd never been born, I shouted. I wish I were dead, like them. It was as if I had said the magic words, Alakazam. And her face went blank, her mouth closed, her arms went slack, and she backed out of the room, stunned, as if she were blowing away like a small brown leaf, thin, brittle, lifeless. So after this, we jump forward in time to our speaker turning 30, and her mother offers her the piano. And she says, "No, I can't take it, it's yours." And her mother says, "It's not ours, it was bought for you. This is yours. You're the only one who can play." Then we jump forward with the quote, "Last week I sent a tuner over to my parents' apartment and had the piano reconditioned for purely sentimental reasons. My mother had died a few months before, and I had been getting things in order for my father." And the story ends with this. "And for the first time, or so it seemed, I noticed the piece. She sits down to play the piano, and she opens the book up to The Pleading Child. And I noticed for the first time, or so it seemed, I noticed the piece on the right-hand side. It was called Perfectly Contented. I tried to play this one as well. It had a lighter melody, but the same flowing rhythm, and turned out to be quite easy. Pleading Child was shorter, but slower. Perfectly Contented was longer, but faster. And after I played them both a few times, I realized they were two halves of the same song." two halves of the same song, two types of daughter. They are both the same song. They are both the same daughter. That is, I think, the big idea here. The daughter who is disobedient, the daughter who is obedient. They're kissing pages of the same thing. Pleading child, perfectly contented. They are two different kissing pages of the same thing. I think that is what is mostly being conveyed here. But as far as talking points, I have to say, this is one of my favorite short stories. And so I think there's a difference between a really well-written short story and a really entertaining short story. They can be the same thing, but Hemingway is one of my favorite writers. Not a whole lot of entertainment value in his short stories, I don't think. I think he does not get the full credit for his character interactions. I think that they are more entertaining than many would allow due to the types of characters which Hemingway cast in his short stories. This short story, really good and extremely entertaining. This short story has all of the symbolism you would want, the two daughters, two songs, that type of thing. It has all of the emotional development that you would want in a short story, with all of these complex emotions. Complex emotions, I think, are the biggest thing about this short story. But it's also extremely entertaining to read. Mr. Chong, so that moment where he's sitting in the audience and we know he can't hear a damn thing, and our speaker knows he can't hear a damn thing. No one else knows that. So she stops, the audience is silent, and then Chong starts clapping. That's a moment straight out of a Marvel movie, right? That is that level of entertainment. All of the characters in here are entertaining, whether they're fun or not. The mother character is not fun. She sure is entertaining. This emotion of wanting her daughter to succeed so badly makes her nearly impossible to look away from. Our speaker, obviously, entertaining. There are some really well written, the feeling of embarrassment that washes over her, but Amy Tan is so good that she knows not to use washing over me, as it is a cliche, right? It also reminds me of, I use this quote all the time. I know I do, and you're probably tired of it. There's a Marilyn Monroe quote, at least purportedly a Marilyn Monroe quote. Who knows? If you can make a girl laugh, you can make her do anything. 100% readers are the same way. If you can make your reader laugh, you can make them feel anything. And because Amy Tan's character opens up to the audience in this way, sharing all of these extremely embarrassing things, sharing all of these extremely horrendous things that you would tell your mother you wished you were dead like her other daughters. Wow. Talk about dangerous writing. You should look up dangerous writing if you've never heard of it, but that's exactly what that is. Because we've all been there. So dangerous writing, basically, you say something that is extremely personal, something that feels very dangerous to you to put out there as a writer. And basically what happens is all of these emotions are universal. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything you felt, I felt. Everything I felt, you felt on some level, at some measure. So when you put these scary things out there, your reader experiences them and thinks, oh, thank God, someone else has felt this. I was so worried it was only me. We as writers are worried to put these things on the page because we think, I'm going to be judged. But in written words, these things get communicated to a reader, and they think, oh, thank God, someone can verbalize these things that I felt. And it ends up bringing that reader ever closer to the speaker, bringing that reader ever closer to the text. So on all of these levels, entertainment, symbolism, emotions in the writing, being readable, all of these levels, being clearly written, all of these levels, this short story succeeds. That's why it's one of my favorites. But it executes so well that I think on many levels it is impossible to fully appreciate. How do you measure the ways that this short story succeeds? Moving on, page doesn't matter because everyone's going to have this in a different collection than me. I'm an idiot. This quote from the short story here. Why don't you like me the way I am? I'm not a genius. I can't play the piano. And even if I could, I wouldn't go on TV if you paid me $1 million, I cried. My mother slapped me. Who asked you be a genius? She shouted. Only ask you be your best, for you's sake. You think I want you be a genius? Huh. What for? Who asked you? The most compelling thing about this bit of dialogue to me is I think they're both lying. I wouldn't go on TV if you paid me $1 million. Yeah, you would. I only asked you to be your best for your sake. No, Mom, I don't think so. So they're both lying to each other in order to get their own way, but it's something that they're lying about in the other's expense. The daughter knows that she's crushing her mother's dreams when she says that. The mother knows that she's taking away great deals of time in order for her daughter to do something that is ultimately not really monetizable. You're not helping your daughter get a job, probably, by playing the piano, right? So they're both lying to each other in that one little spit exchange. They're both spitting on each other right there and lying, which is, I mean, but in defense of the speaker's a child. How much? So the mother is obviously lying here. It's not just for the daughter's sake. It's not. But how much of it is? What portion of this is our speaker's mother trying to benefit her daughter? And how much of it's selfish? How much of it is that mother, that doting mother, hoping to have something appreciable from her daughter? How much of it is that? I think that there is a lot of room for debate in this short story. Talking about the complex emotions. There is this pervasive sense in this short story of the child knowing her mother is disappointed in her. That's a big part of this short story. What is that emotion? It's not shame exactly. It's different than shame. But what is it? What is that? Is there a word for that emotion? I don't know that there is. And if there is a word for that emotion, what then is the turn from being so upset that someone is disappointed in you, that you want to upset them. It's almost like the mirror image of Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude being enjoying the failure of your friends. It's almost like the mirror image of that. It's almost like that turned backwards. Wanting to fail in order to disappoint someone. It's almost the inverse. I don't know that there are words for either of those things. Because I don't think that the former is quite shame. I think that it's different than that. I think that shame is more direct. Shame is more disappointment in the self, rather than recognizing disappointment from the other. Right? Doesn't that make sense? Is there like a quasi-shame that can happen? A semi-shame? Right? What is it? I don't know, but it is an extremely interesting emotion, and it really is not easy to write about. How do you pull that out? How do you tug that out of a story? That turn there. I don't know. The last question that I want to pose here is over another difficult emotion which this story invokes. I don't really know the age of our speaker here. It's young, right? I don't know that the exact age is communicated. I think probably between 4th and 7th grade, maybe. Somewhere in there, I think. Maybe 3rd and 7th grade. Our speaker in this short story is sort of slowly coming to the realization that no, you can't be anything that you want to be. A lot of us are limited. We've got a ceiling. There's a cap to our potential. What's the correct age for that realization? At what point? So, for example, if you meet a 50-year-old man, you don't expect him to tell you he's going to be an astronaut someday. Right? You don't expect that. If you're not an astronaut now, what are the odds you're going to be? We feel that at some point it is irrational to want to grow. We feel that at some point it is irrational to want to do different things, to want to be extreme, to want to be exponential. Right? You meet a 50-year-old guy and he says, I'm going to be an engineer, and you ask him what he does, and he says nothing to do with engineering, guy might be a little bit crazy. On the flip side, if you meet a kindergartner and you ask them what they want to be, and they say, I want to be a bus driver, not that there's anything wrong with bus driving, just picking a random profession, you kind of take a step back. Really? A bus driver? That's where your imagination went? You ask a 5-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they say, well, you know, I got my sights set pretty low. That takes you aback. That's a weird thing. What? What do you mean you got your sights set pretty low? So, for example, the job that I have, if a 5-year-old told me they wanted my job, I'd have serious problems with that kid. No, you don't, Billy. No, you don't. You want to do something with your life. So where's that line? You've got the cross there. Where does that happen? So in that X is the point where you have to start reining in expectations on life. Where is that? And not that you have to, but the society sort of expects you to. Where is that point? I don't know. I think this is an interesting conversation. That is all I have for this. I hope that you enjoyed this. And if you did, consider hitting that like button. If you're here by chance but not design, consider subscribing. And as always, look, I got lots of short story discussions here on the channel. Consider hitting that playlist up and finding another short story that you enjoy. And I hope to see you in the next video here on Strip Cover Lit.